Hi, I'm pro saxophonist Jamie Anderson, saxing up your Sunday once again right here on Get Your Sax Together. Almost every player I've ever encountered has said they like listening to or playing blues music. So in today's free online lesson, you'll be learning how to play the blues on saxophone. Whether you're a complete beginner on sax, a developer or an expert, and whether you play alto, tenor or any other sax, the blues is the one genre that's universally accessible to all. Today we're going to unpack the origin story of blues music, all the genres associated with the blues, what the musical structure of a 12-bar is, and of course what notes you can use to be bluesy. And make sure you watch right to the end because I've got a very special bonus for you that will instantly get you sounding better when you play the blues. Playing the blues is so much more than just a cerebral concept to be understood though. The best blues is usually a visceral expression of hardship or challenge, a universal feeling that transcends creed, colour, age or nationality. Before we start learning to play the blues on sax, let's briefly delve into the history of the word itself, where it comes from, what it stands for, and how time has reshaped its very definition. Just before we get well and truly bluesed up though, I want to quickly mention an awesome gift that I've created for you guys. I've called it the Saxophone Success Masterclass, and it's a zero fluff 1-hour lesson designed to help you get the sound you've always wanted, transform your timing and learn a whole bunch of pro tips and tricks to take your playing to the next level. Best of all though, it's totally free. The link is in the description, or you can visit getyoursaxtogether.com/masterclass. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. And now let's get back to the blues. So what is the blues anyway? Well, above all else, blues music is a fusion, a melting pot, originating from the plaintive work songs, field hollers, spirituals and chants of enslaved Africans in the American Deep South, fused with the tribal musical traditions of West Africa and classical music. The blues, as we would start to recognise it today, arose around the 1870s and became more prevalent at the start of the 20th century, with the first reference to blues in printed music in 1908. The word itself may have come from the phrase the Blue Devils coined in the UK in the 1600s, referring to severe alcohol withdrawal, but the first contextually accurate use of the word blues was recorded in the diary of African-American Charlotte Fortin in 1862 in relation to her depressed and lonesome state of mind. From its humble origins in a cappella vocal verses, blues music steadily diversified and began incorporating various additional instruments through the 20th century, gradually branching into many subgenres such as Delta blues, bluegrass, country blues, Chicago blues, jazz blues, gospel, rhythm and blues, and eventually blues rock and even electronic music. The blues has always been synonymous with an expression of suffering or loneliness, with most early blues verses dealing with oppression, natural disasters like floods, lost love and general hardship. But through the ages, the intensity and poignancy of these emotions can often be more elusive, with the music itself simply following a blues chord structure without being overtly bluesy. The musical factor that has almost always defined blues music through the ages is a repeating, relentless rhythm. Originally simple chugging guitars or harmonica, and later repetitive walking bass patterns and backbeat drum grooves. The insistent, trance-like pulse of blues has always taken people away from their everyday mindset to a more transcendent place. This has never been more true in the ecstatic, transformational tradition of gospel music. Originally a simple line repeated 4 times, the start of the 20th century saw the emergence and eventual dominance of the standard 12-bar blues that we all now know and love, with an AAB verse pattern. There's many other blues chord patterns that aren't 12 bars long, like Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man or Ray Charles' I've Got a Woman. But for the purposes of this lesson, we'll just be focusing on the 12-bar blues. If you go down into the description and click the link, you can get the free PDF for this video, which has got these 12-bar blues forms written out in every key, along with every blues scale. That is a seriously good resource. So be sure to go down there, click the link and pick up your copy. So this is what the original 12-bar blues looks like, with the Roman numerals representing the chord from that step of the home key, and the chords as they would be in the home key of C. This is the kind of chord progression you'd be using if you were playing something like Sweet Home Chicago or Route 66. Now, let's look at a different variation. This is what the 12-bar looks like in a jazz context. There's an additional 2-5-1 in the 4th bar to lead to chord 4. There's an additional 3-6 in bar 8, and the 5-4-1 turnaround in bars 9 and 10 is now replaced with a 2-5-1. This is the kind of chord progression you'll be using if you were playing a blue note style hard bop jazz tune like Billy's Bounce or Straight No Chaser. Now, what I want to know is, have you got a favourite 12-bar blues? Stick it down in the comments if you have, and I'll get the bowling right now by telling you that my favourite blues of all time has got to be Jeep's Blues by Duke Ellington, recorded live at the Newport Jazz Festival in 1956. A legendary concert also famous for Paul Gonsalves's 27-chorus blues solo on Diminuendo in Blue that ignited both the crowd and Duke Ellington's failing career. Anyway, now we know the history of the blues, we now know the chords, but what about the notes, and what are we actually going to play? That is what we're going to learn now. Okay, we're now at the point where the rubber hits the road, and that is what notes we actually play when we improvise on the blues. So to keep this nice and simple, I'm going to break this into 3 broad approaches, 3 toolkits, if you like, each with its own level of complexity. In approach 1, we're going to use a blanket blues scale and effectively ignore all the chords. I call this the Lord of the Rings approach, one scale to rule them all. In approach 2, we still mainly use a blanket approach, but we choose between the major and minor varieties of the blues scale, and we selectively throw in some carefully chosen notes from the chords. The final approach, approach 3, is an all-inclusive approach that potentially incorporates the blues scales, all the notes, and from all the chords, all the chromatic and diatonic passing notes as well. This is definitely for more advanced players. But what's really important to remember is that approach 1 is no worse than approaches 2 or 3. In fact, some of the best blues players and soul players like Grover Washington, Maceo Parker, for example, almost exclusively use approach 1 to great effect. Whereas the newly graduated college whiz kid who's all over approach 3 can drastically miss the mark by using approach 3 out of context and sound terrible. Let's get into this then, and we'll start with approach 1. So just before we steam in and start jamming, let's back it up again on our journey through the blues and take a brief look at the history of the blues scale. As explained on the website composerstoolbox.com, Carl Engel's 1870 book, The Music of the Most Ancient Nations, contains an example of a scale that the author found on an mbira or thumb piano from the Senegambia region of Africa, now modern-day Senegal and Gambia. Importantly, some 24% of enslaved Africans came from the Senegambia region. The notes on the mbira were noted as A, E flat, E, D, G, A and C, and D, which, when reshuffled, match our standard A minor blues scale exactly. The author also cites an example of a very similar scale from the Congo. Taking into account the prevalence of the standard pentatonic scale in many other African musical traditions, and the fact that the music of Western Africa often sounds strikingly like blues music anyway, I think we can say with some certainty that the blues scale has its roots in Africa. So, from the tribes of West Africa via the horrors of the slave trade and filtered through the melting pot and vocal hollers of early America, we get our humble blues scale. Root, minor third, fourth, flattened fifth, fifth and flattened seventh. An unconventional 6-note scale that somehow conveys the universal emotion of human melancholy. So, before we start playing the blues scale, it's important to understand that the blues scale comes from a vocal, non-notated tradition. The flattened third and the flattened fifth are only a best approximation of the vocal notes that are between the cracks of the piano tempered scale. However, the good news for us, and maybe one of the reasons that blues sounds so good on sax, is that we can smear these blue notes just like a singer. So we've got our Lord of the Rings scale for approach 1, the blues scale, and I'm about to demonstrate how you can use this scale now. But just because we have the blues scale ready to go doesn't mean you're going to sound good using it. Why? Because the rhythm and groove of what you play and your sax sound is even more important than the notes. On the card linked above is my video with 3 tips to get you sounding better without playing more notes. Really important. And after that, you'll see the card for my lesson on getting a great tone using overtones. Although both of these things are covered in my Saxophone Success Masterclass, which you can access for free using the link in the description. So whatever approach you're going to use, always remember to play it with a strong rhythm and let the music breathe. Okay, here's a demonstration of just using the blues scale on a standard 12 bar. I've knocked up some backing tracks for this lesson that you can also download for free along with a PDF in the description. Just click the link down there. I'm only going to be using the notes of concert B flat minor blues scale. That's a C minor blues scale for tenor and a G minor blues scale for alto. Here we go. Whether you're going to use approach 1, 2 or 3, sooner or later you might wonder why you don't sound as good as your heroes. There could be a number of reasons for this. Maybe you need to improve your tone. Maybe you need to learn how to growl and use bends and falls to shape your sound more. Maybe you're not playing with a strong rhythmic feel. You might need to work on your articulation or your basic technique. All these things are vital if you want to sound like a great blues saxophonist. My series on technique, linked above, has loads of resources to help you with all this stuff, as well as the Saxophone Success Masterclass linked in the description. But arguably the best thing you can do is to spend loads of time listening to your heroes and try and mimic what they play. When you mimic someone, you learn what it feels like to play like them and you take on their qualities. That's why transcription is so valuable. I've put together a playlist on Spotify with loads of examples of great blues saxophonists, and I've included a link to that playlist in the description. If you get the free PDF in the description, there's also a full track listing and the name of each saxophonist to make things easier to find wherever you listen to your music. Listening is vital. What you'll accumulate when you do this is a bank of great licks that you can then transpose into every key, setting you up to sound much better when you express yourself through the blues. So without further ado, let's talk about approach 2. We're going to keep everything we learned from approach 1, our basic minor blues scale, but add in the major version of the blues scale as well. So before I explain what the major blues scale is, don't stress about having to learn a new scale. Because you've already learned all your minor blues scales in all 12 keys, you've already learned all the major blues scales without even knowing it. This is because the major version of the blues scale is the same notes as the minor blues scale, but down a minor third. So on a C blues, you can use the C minor blues scale and the A minor blues scale, except starting on C. For example, when we start an A minor blues scale on C, we get the root, second, major and minor third, fifth and sixth. This is our major blues scale in C. The most distinctive feature of this scale is that it has a minor third and a major third, and you can choose which one you use. One strange thing about playing the blues is, especially with approaches 1 and 2, many of the notes don't fit the chords in theory. For example, the first chord of a C blues is C7. The C minor blues scale has an E flat, an F and an F sharp in it, and if you played a C7 chord on piano and added an E flat, F and F sharp, it would sound terrible. But these blues scales have such a strong integrity of their own that they just independently float over the chords. That's one of the weird things about the blues scale. You could even throw it over a major 7 chord, which would mean that apart from the root, the major 7 chord and the blues scale have only got one note in common, which should sound awful, but it still works, as long as the blues scale is played convincingly with strong rhythm and phrasing. That's the key. So be warned, if you indecisively fripp around on an E flat and an F sharp on a C major 7 chord and you think it's going to sound bluesy, you might be in for a nasty surprise. So we now have 2 scales to use using approach 2, the minor blues scale of the key and the notes from the blues scale 3 semitones beneath the key. We could leave it there, ignore the chords and crank out strong phrases using those 2 scales, and that would sound really good. However, with a bit more knowledge of the chords in a 12-bar blues, we can demonstrate that we really know what we're doing. In approach 3, you'll learn all the notes of the main chords in the blues and use those notes at the right time in your solos. But for approach 2, we're just going to focus on one aspect of the chords, and that is the major third and the minor third of the key. So let's say we're playing a simple rhythm and blues 12-bar in the key of C. The first chord is C7 and the third of that chord is an E natural. The second chord is F7 and has an E flat in it. The 7th of F7 is E flat. Then we're back to C7 for 2 bars, so we need to go back to the E natural. We get to the 5th bar and the chord is F7 for 2 bars, so we flip to the E flat. Then it's C7 again for 2 bars, so use the E natural. At bar 9, the chords are G7 for a bar and F7 for a bar. This time we're going to emphasize the third of each chord. That's B natural is the third of G7 and A is the third of F7. If you don't know what all the notes are for these different chord types, go to the video linked above on the card now and that will help you understand it all. For the last 2 bars of the sequence, just jam out on the 2 blues scales, the minor and the major. So that now gives us some target notes to build our phrases around. You can use the blues scales, but focus on the difference between the chords with E natural, C7 chords, the chords with E flat, the F7 chords, and the B to A change in the turnaround in bars 9 and 10. This will get you out of the rut of approach 1 and the blanket blues scale thing. It does take a bit more knowledge and practice though, and it's common for people to get lost in the chords as they try and think about what notes to play. Don't worry, this is very normal. If this is you, then try playing just 1 note per measure to start with to get the harmonic rhythm embedded. Right. All that being said, let me try and demonstrate approach 2. If you want some examples of players who play like this, go to the list of tracks I've put in the free PDF linked in the description. We're talking Lee Allen, Junior Walker, King Curtis, Grover Washington, etc. We're still using the basic 12-bar blues chord pattern for this example. Here we go. In the third and final approach, we're using a variety of more sophisticated devices, a more complex chord sequence and more chromatic notes. It's the kind of hard bop style that you would associate with the classic Blue Note records of the mid-50s to the early 60s. Hank Mobley, John Coltrane, Sonny Stitt, Sonny Rollins, Dexter Gordon, Cannonball Adderley, those sorts of players. Of course, we can still take forward everything from the first 2 approaches, and strong phrases from both blues scales can still be thrown over any chord. I can't cover this approach in detail in this video as it would involve teaching you how to play bebop in its entirety. And anyway, this video is specifically about the blues rather than bebop 251s. But here it is in a nutshell. All the chord notes from every chord can be used, plus their extensions and any connecting scales. Plus, certain chord notes can be approached diatonically or chromatically with surrounding notes from either direction. This is called using enclosures. Learning all this stuff is arduous and disconnected in theoretical terms, and it's better just to transcribe lots of bop players and see what they do to really understand the style. I created a 3-part series to help you with transcription, and it's linked on the card above. The biggest danger here is that the true feeling of the blues is lost in a sea of meaningless notes. It's still a 12-bar blues, but there's nothing stylistically to distinguish it from any other bebop chord sequence. However, the master saxophonists I just mentioned all internalised their craft to such a level that they still maintain a keen sense of the blues being a blues, especially at slow tempos, and radiate a poignant bluesy feeling throughout. For example, check out Charlie Parker on Parker's Mood, Hank Mobley on Grease and Easy, or Sonny Stitt on Blues for Yard. I've changed the backing track for Approach 3 to reflect the chord pattern and groove more often used in jazz. And you can see an analysis of what I play in the free PDF linked in the description. Again, the backing track is also available for free with the same link. So here we go. So we've followed the blues all the way from the tribes of West Africa through the work songs and spirituals of Mississippi slavery into the 12-bar blues of the early 20th century and right up to the blues of Blue Note, honking R&B and the soulful bluesy jazz of the 50s and 60s. But the journey didn't stop there for blues sax. In fact, it only just got going. The blues scale, with its mournful and emotional flattened blue notes, duly became the de facto sound for virtually all soul, funk, rock, pop and electronic dance music ever made. As I mentioned earlier, the blues scale has such a strong and cohesive internal integrity that it fits over a huge range of styles, including my own theme music, by the way. If you go through my Hall of Fame playlist, you'll see that tracks as diverse as Jubel, Pink Panther, Lily Was Here, Born to Run and Biana all use the blues scale, as does virtually every funk, soul, rock or pop solo ever played. To know the blues on sax is to hold the keys to the kingdom, and the beauty of it is a fantastic lick you've learnt from a 1950s Earl Bostic song will sound just as good over a 2019 banging house track. Now, as promised, here's that special bonus that you've been waiting for all this time. I'm saving you a bit of hassle and giving you 5 great blues licks to get your lick library off to a great start. To get you started, here's 5 awesome blues licks. I've only given the pitches for tenor, as you should learn the licks in every key anyway, whether you play alto or tenor. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the blues scale has been appropriated by a huge swathe of music genres. So the great news for us blues saxophonists is that you can take your best blues licks from Brecker, Junior Walker, Charlie Parker or anyone else and just slap them right over a wide variety of grooves and tempos. To demonstrate this, I'm going to get the 5 licks I just taught you and string them all together. Then I'll play them over a blues shuffle, a dirty funk groove, and finally an electronic dance beat. This way you'll see that the blues scale is a universal tool with the sound of West Africa, the cotton plantations, early 20th century black music and everything in between and after echoing through the ages with this scale. Here we go. that's it for this Sunday. I don't generally do things by halves, and I want you guys to get the absolute maximum benefit from these lessons, so it's been quite a long one. With any luck, you've now got a much deeper understanding of the blues, and one of the three approaches is a good fit for where you are with your sax journey right now. So just before we get to that funky and bluesy end card music, if you want to learn some more in-depth sax stuff, go to getyoursaxtogether.com/masterclass and get your free 1-hour lesson with me. And as always, you can support me by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon to be notified when I upload new content. Check out my Instagram feed and like my Facebook page. Woo! That's a lot of love to give. Until next Sunday, even though it's a massive contradiction in terms, happy bluesing!